The first contraction had arrived as a whisper, a tightening low in Eliza Hart's belly that made her pause at the sink, one wet plate slipping back into the soapy water. She had stilled, waiting, unsure if it was real or another false alarm that had teased her during the last week. But the next one came harder, a wave that climbed her spine and pressed against her ribs until she had to grip the counter's edge and breathe in slow, measured counts. By the time lightning split the Atlanta sky in a jagged scar, there was no denying the rhythm beginning inside her. She pressed her palm against the rain-slicked glass of her apartment window, forehead leaning into the cool pane. The city stretched below, blurred neon and brake lights smeared by the storm. Each rumble of thunder vibrated in her bones. Or perhaps that was her own body answering, winding tighter and tighter around the life she carried. The studio felt too small, too cluttered with shadows and equipment. Tripods leaned in the corner, lenses gleamed dull in the flicker of lightning. Memory cards full of other people's beginnings stacked like fragile secrets on the table. She had documented countless births, slipping silently into delivery rooms with her camera, capturing the raw first cries of strangers' children. She had always been the observer. Tonight, she was the story. Another contraction seized her, forcing her to fold, knees bent, breath strangled. She counted through it, lips pursed, 45 seconds, 50. Nearly a minute of pressure that blurred her sight and made her whisper to the unseen child within, a private promise. When it eased, she straightened, palm flat on the small of her back, the other hand cradling her belly. "Time," she said aloud, though no one was there to hear her but the storm. The decision to walk this path alone had not come lightly. Once years ago she had believed in forever, had woven a marriage out of laughter, ambition, and fragile dreams of children. But grief had unraveled it, left her clutching silence and empty nights. Later came the brief relationship with David, a flame too bright and careless to last. When the test turned positive, she had told no one. Protecting this life meant protecting it from old mistakes. She would be enough, she had to be. The bag by the door had been packed for weeks. Comfortable clothes folded with clinical precision, toiletries, the yellow onesie she had bought the day she first heard the heartbeat flutter like wings. Yellow, because she wanted no projections, no labels, only surprise and pure love when she finally saw the face that had been kicking against her ribs for months. She knelt to recheck it, knowing everything was already in place. Keys, insurance card, camera tucked into a side pocket, though she doubted she would have the strength to raise it tonight. Still, habit clung. A contraction cut through her mid-sentence thoughts, knocking the air from her lungs harder this time. She staggered to the wall, fingers splaying against the cool plaster as she gasped. They were closer now, the clock on the microwave blinking 11:42 as she timed the next one. 5 minutes, maybe less. Her birthing class instructor had said to wait until 4 minutes apart, but instinct told her not to delay. She caught her reflection in the mirror and almost did not recognize the woman staring back. Her cheeks flushed with strain, her dark eyes wide with terror and anticipation, hair pulled into a haphazard knot. She looked younger and older than 32, a girl carrying the weight of centuries in her body. She steadied herself with a mantra she had used daily since the test. "You have survived worse. You can do this." The storm lashed harder as she drove, wipers thrashing against sheets of water. Brake lights smeared across the windshield like veins of fire. Each contraction forced her to pull to the shoulder, hands gripping the steering wheel, breath rattling through clenched teeth. She whispered to the child inside to hold on a little longer, that they were close. By the time Midtown Mercy's emergency entrance appeared, her shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cool air, her body trembling with exertion. She staggered inside, blinking against the violent contrast of sterile white light after the storm dark, words tangled on her tongue. I'm having, but the contraction silenced her, folding her to her knees. Hands reached her, lifting, steadying, voices overlapping in urgent cadence. A wheelchair rolled up, and then they moved fast down corridors that smelled of antiseptic and floor wax. The silver-haired nurse appeared beside her, clipboard ready, voice kind and precise. "Name? Age? First baby?" "Eliza Hart," she gasped. 32. First. 3 minutes. Maybe less. The elevator dinged, carrying them up. Through a narrow window, she glimpsed the sky, still being torn apart by lightning. It felt like an omen and a mirror, the world outside raging as fiercely as the storm within her body. Another contraction buckled her, sweat-slick palms gripping the rails. She prayed silently to the gods she had long abandoned, begged only that the child survive, that she survive. They wheeled her into a delivery room as the lights flickered once, twice, then surrendered to darkness. Emergency lamps glowed dull orange, throwing long shadows across the walls. A voice from the hall reported a transformer down and a power cut. "Backup partial only," Nurse Meredith said, adjusting monitors that now blinked sluggishly. Another contraction ripped through Eliza, dragging a cry from her throat. "This baby isn't waiting," Meredith snapped. The door opened, footsteps purposeful, stride unhurried by the chaos. The figure was tall, outlined in surgical scrubs, confidence radiating in each movement. Eliza's vision blurred with pain, but something about that stance carved through haze and memory. "What do we have?" The voice was steady, deep, the cadence of someone used to controlling storms of flesh and blood. Meredith rattled statistics, dilation, contraction intervals, and fetal heart rate. Eliza clutched the rails, trying to focus, and then the figure stepped closer, emergency light painting familiar planes across his face. The world stopped. Breath, storm, contraction, all held suspended for an impossible second. Dr. Nathan Cole, her ex-husband, the man she had once loved so fiercely that losing him had felt like losing her own skin. The man she had not spoken to in 4 years, not since grief had shattered them into separate silences. His eyes met hers, the same dark eyes that had looked at her with devotion, devastation, and cold retreat. "Eliza," he whispered, her name carried on disbelief, on recognition that sliced deeper than pain. But before any reckoning could come, another contraction seized her, dragging her backward into the rhythm of a body that no longer obeyed will or memory. She cried out, head falling against the pillow. Nathan moved forward, mask of professionalism sliding into place, hands steady, though she caught the faint tremor only she would know. "I need to examine you," he said. His voice had dropped into the calm authority of the doctor, not the husband, not the man she had once trusted with her soul. "Can you do that for me?" Tears she did not understand streaked her cheeks, mingling with sweat. She nodded. She was forced to surrender to him in this dimly lit crucible, with storms above and within. To the past, to the only man she had once trusted beyond herself. The room hummed with urgency, equipment clicking, and nurses moving efficiently. But all Eliza saw was the impossible fact of Nathan's face above her, his voice guiding her through breaths, his hands steady in a world where nothing else was steady. Despite everything that had broken and the years of silence, she trusted him with the most precious thing she had ever carried. And as the storm thundered outside, Eliza Hart closed her eyes and let her ex-husband guide her through the most terrifying and miraculous moment of her life. The contraction tore through Eliza Hart's body with the brutal inevitability of a tidal wave. Her knuckles whitened against the bedrails, eyes squeezing shut against the pain. But when she opened them again, she could not escape the face hovering above her. Nathan Cole, the man she had once sworn her life to. The man who had walked away when grief carved them both hollow, now stood at her bedside in scrubs, his hands steady, his voice commanding. The storm outside battered the windows like a beast trying to claw its way in. But the greater storm raged inside this dimly lit room, where past and present collided in a flash of lightning. The emergency lamps buzzed with a dull hum, washing the room in a murky orange glow. Shadows sprawled along the walls, distorting monitors and IV poles into grotesque silhouettes. Nurse Meredith's voice cut through the heavy silence as she rattled vitals, her pen scratching furiously against her clipboard. Eliza's chest heaved, each breath sharp and shallow. She tried to focus on Meredith's calm words, but Nathan's presence devoured her attention, and his voice was as familiar as it was alien after 4 years of silence. "Eliza, listen to me," Nathan said, his tone shifting from clinical to personal despite the mask he was trying to wear. "You are fully dilated. We need to get this baby delivered now." His words should have grounded her, but they pulled her deeper into a whirlpool of memory. She remembered him whispering to her in the hushed dark of their bedroom when she had been pregnant once before, telling her they would get through it together. She remembered his silence when they did not, when the nursery stayed empty and her heart cracked. The ache of that loss clung to her now, pressing against the raw edges of the present. Another contraction buckled her body, a wave of primal force she could neither resist nor control. She cried out, her voice raw and unguarded, echoing down the corridor. Nathan moved quickly, guiding her through the rhythm, his words sharp with authority. Breathe, in through your nose, out through your mouth. Stay with me. She wanted to resent him, to hate the steadiness in his tone, but her body obeyed without question, trusting the same voice it once trusted with her life. Lightning slashed the sky beyond the window, followed by thunder that shook the walls. The lights flickered again, plunging the room into deeper shadows for a terrifying moment before stabilizing. The storm outside felt like a mirror of the one inside this room. Electricity crackling in the air, chaos pressing from every side. "Eliza, we are almost there," Meredith encouraged, though her eyes flicked nervously to the monitors. "Heart rate is dropping. Baby needs to come soon." Panic surged, cutting through Eliza's exhaustion. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She turned her head toward Nathan, the one person she should have trusted least, yet the one her instincts clung to like a lifeline. "Can you do this?" she whispered through clenched teeth, her voice breaking. Nathan froze for the briefest of moments, her words striking deeper than she could have intended. His eyes met hers, the calm veneer cracking just enough for her to glimpse the man underneath. The husband who had once adored her, the man who had once failed her. "Yes," he said finally, steady and sure. "I can. I will. Trust me one more time." Another contraction surged. Eliza bore down, gripping the rails until her arms shook, her screams mingling with the storm outside. Nathan positioned himself, movements precise and practiced, though his jaw was tight, betraying emotions he couldn't let surface. "Push, Eliza. That's it. Push." Pain ripped through her like fire, her vision blurred, sweat dripping into her eyes. She thought she might shatter into pieces, but Nathan's voice was the thread that held her together. "You're stronger than this pain. I need you to give me everything right now." His words sank into her bones, stirring a strength she did not know she still possessed. She pushed with everything inside her, muscles straining, body surrendering to the primal force of creation. "Head is crowning," Nathan announced, voice sharp with urgency. Meredith leaned closer, eyes focused, hands ready. "Almost there." Eliza screamed again, raw and guttural, the storm outside roaring as if to answer her. For a split second, she remembered the night they had lost their first child, the storm that had raged then too. The way Nathan had sat in silence beside her, unable to speak, unable to hold her. The memory nearly broke her now, but then his voice cut through the haze, steady and unwavering. "One more, Eliza. One more push. Do it for her." She gathered every last shred of strength left in her body, bore down, and felt the indescribable release as the baby slipped free into Nathan's waiting hands. The cry that followed was shrill and beautiful, a sound that filled every hollow space in the room. Eliza collapsed back against the bed, tears streaming down her face, her body trembling with exhaustion and awe. "She's here," Nathan said softly, his voice breaking despite his efforts to contain it. "She's perfect." Meredith released a shaky laugh of relief, her pen clattering to the floor. "Strong lungs. That's a good sign." Nathan worked quickly, clearing the airway and checking reflexes, his hands sure though his breath trembled. Eliza watched him through her tears, every movement of his hands illuminated in the dim orange glow. For all the silence and absence of the past 4 years, he was delivering the child she had chosen to raise alone. When he placed the baby on her chest, warmth flooded Eliza's body. Tiny fists curled against her skin, the furious wails softening at the sound of her heartbeat. She looked down at her daughter, at the miracle of her, and felt her soul crack open wider than the pain ever had. "Hello, little love," she whispered, her voice breaking into sobs. I've been waiting for you." The baby quieted, her eyes blinking open for the first time, dark and searching. Eliza felt herself dissolve under that gaze, under the certainty that her entire life had changed forever in this instant. Nathan lingered at her side, silent, eyes fixed on the newborn with an intensity Eliza couldn't bear to interpret. In the half-light of emergency lamps and storm shadows, it felt like the years had rewound, as if grief and distance had never torn them apart. But the weight of reality pressed in again, the years of silence, the mistakes, the unhealed wounds. "What's her name?" Meredith asked gently, pen ready once more. Eliza looked down at her daughter, then lifted her gaze to Nathan, meeting his eyes across the fragile miracle they now shared. Her lips trembled as she spoke. Lila Grace Hart, the middle name hung like a bridge, a fragile thread between two broken people. Grace, Nathan's mother's name. He flinched almost imperceptibly, the words striking like a ghost resurrected. "It's beautiful," he murmured, the words rough, unsteady. For a heartbeat, none of them moved. Then Nathan straightened, peeling off his gloves with slow precision. He stepped back toward the shadows, surrendering her and the child to the warmth of Meredith's care. The storm outside began to ease, thunder fading into the distance, lightning only an occasional flicker now. But inside Eliza's chest, a storm far greater had just been born, one that would not pass so easily. As she cradled Lila against her chest, Eliza felt the weight of both past and future pressing down. The daughter she had promised to raise alone had entered the world in the hands of the man she had once loved more than life itself. And though she wanted to believe the storm was ending, she knew in her bones it was only beginning. The delivery room had quieted, but silence did not mean peace. Machines ticked softly, the emergency lamps hummed, and the storm outside retreated with reluctant rumbles of thunder. Eliza Hart lay back against her pillows, her newborn pressed against her chest, her body trembling in the aftermath of labor. Yet her mind refused to surrender to rest. The weight of what had just occurred pressed down harder than the child in her arms. She could not reconcile its impossibility. Nathan Cole, the man who had vanished from her life in the wreckage of their first loss, the man whose absence had felt like a betrayal more profound than any words, had been the one to deliver her daughter. His voice still lingered in the air, echoing inside her chest. It had guided her through the most harrowing moments, the same way it once guided her through life, plans, and dreams of a future that had never come. She glanced toward the doorway. Nathan stood half in shadow, his scrubs damp with sweat, his gloves discarded, his shoulders taut as though he were carrying an invisible weight. He should have left, protocol dictating the handover to nurses once the mother and child were stable. But he lingered, trapped in the liminal space between duty and memory, between professionalism and something raw, older, more dangerous. Meredith Shaw moved about the room quietly, her presence the only anchor in the maelstrom. She adjusted monitors, checked Eliza's vitals, and smiled reassuringly. "Both of you are strong," she murmured. "She came into the world fighting, and you held nothing back." Eliza nodded faintly, her eyes still locked on Nathan. He must have felt the pull of her stare because he shifted closer, stopping just short of her bedside. His face was calm, but his eyes betrayed him. They flickered with something she could not name. Regret, longing, fear, perhaps all three. "You did it," he said softly, his voice stripped of its professional armor. "She's here. She's safe." Eliza swallowed hard, her throat raw from screams. "You did it," she whispered back, unable to deny the truth. "You brought her into the world." The words hung between them, heavy with more than gratitude. They carried all the weight of what they had lost, what they had once hoped to gain, and the fragile miracle lying in her arms now. She wanted to tell him to leave, to vanish like before, to let her rebuild the life she had carefully chosen for herself. But when she looked at her daughter, Lila Grace, she felt the undeniable thread binding them together. The baby stirred against her chest, her tiny fists unfurling as if reaching toward the world. Eliza stroked her cheek and momentarily imagined she could keep the outside complications at bay. But Nathan's presence shattered that illusion. He was no longer just the ghost of her past. He was here, flesh and blood, with eyes that had seen her at her most vulnerable and hands that had delivered their miracle. The memory of Savannah rushed back unbidden as though the storm had dragged it up from the depths of her mind. That night of too much wine, loneliness, and silence. The phone call she should never have made. The comfort she should never have sought. She had buried it deep and told herself it was a mistake to be forgotten. But now, with her daughter's dark eyes gazing up at her, she wondered if that single night had changed more than she dared to admit. Meredith broke the silence, oblivious to the storm brewing between them. "We'll need to move you to recovery soon, Eliza. The power should return in the next hour. You'll both be monitored closely." She glanced at Nathan, her eyes kind but knowing. "Doctor, you should rest. You've been on your feet all night." Nathan nodded, though his gaze never left Eliza and the baby. "I'll check on them again before I leave." His voice was clipped, almost defensive, as if he were trying to convince himself he had no reason to linger. Eliza turned her face away, unable to bear the intensity of his stare. Instead, she focused on her daughter's tiny weight and the steady rhythm of her breathing. But even as she tried to lose herself in the miracle she cradled, she felt Nathan's presence like a shadow at her back. A reminder that the past she thought she had buried had just walked into her present and laid claim to her future. The minutes stretched, thick and heavy. Nurses came and went, adjusting machines, bringing warm blankets, and recording notes on clipboards. Through it all, Nathan remained silent, his figure still at the edge of the room. Eliza finally closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling her under. But not before she whispered to her daughter, a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. "I'll protect you," she said, "no matter what storms come." But the storm had already arrived, and it wore the face of the man she had once loved. The man she could not forget, who had just delivered the one thing that bound them together forever. When Eliza drifted into sleep, Nathan finally allowed himself to move closer. He studied the curve of Lila's face, her chest's delicate rise and fall, and the uncanny resemblance to a family he had once dreamed of building. His hand twitched, as though tempted to reach out, but he stopped himself. His breath caught as he whispered words too soft for anyone to hear. "I should have been here all along." Then, with the quiet shuffle of his shoes against tile, he stepped back into the shadows, leaving mother and child in the dim glow of the emergency light, though the mark of his presence would linger long after the storm had passed. The storm had passed, but the echoes lingered inside Eliza Hart's chest like the low rumble of thunder long after lightning fades. She sat in the recovery ward, her daughter nestled against her breast, the quiet of the hospital almost too sharp after the chaos of labor. Lila Grace slept soundly, her tiny breaths warm against Eliza's skin, while monitors blinked steady green reassurance. Yet peace eluded her. Sleep would not come, not while the weight of the past sat just beyond the threshold. Nathan Cole had disappeared when they wheeled her here, slipping into the sterile maze of the hospital with his shoulders squared like a man running from something only he could see. Eliza had not stopped replaying the moment their eyes had locked in the delivery room, the impossible collision of their histories with the miracle of the present. He had caught their child in his hands, the same ones that had once held her through nights of laughter, the same ones that had gone cold when grief had torn them apart. Nurse Meredith bustled in and out, her warmth a steady balm. She checked vitals, offered gentle words, and laid a reassuring palm on Eliza's shoulder. "You did beautifully," she said. "She's strong." "You both are," Eliza murmured. "Thanks," but her thoughts wandered back to the man who had left, and yet had been here when she needed him most. The hospital quiet deepened into the soft stillness of early morning. Eliza traced her daughter's cheek, marveling at the small perfection she had carried into the world. For a fragile moment, she allowed herself to imagine that nothing else existed. She and Lila were the only family she had chosen to build alone. But memories pressed in, shadows whispering truths she had buried. Savannah, the hotel bar, that one night of surrender to loneliness. Her chest tightened as she remembered dialing his number after a year of silence. She remembered the tremor in his voice when he answered, how quickly the conversation had dissolved from cautious words to raw confessions. She had told herself it was weakness, a mistake to forget. Yet now, with her daughter's dark eyes gazing at her, she could no longer deny the question clawing at her heart. Footsteps in the corridor broke her thoughts. She looked up to see Nathan standing in the doorway, hesitant, as if seeking permission to cross the threshold. He looked exhausted, his scrubs wrinkled, shadows carved deep beneath his eyes. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of years and silence filled the air between them. "I shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low, almost uncertain. "But I needed to know you were all right." Eliza's throat tightened. She wanted to tell him to leave, to let her keep the fragile sanctuary she had built for herself and her child. But she also remembered how his voice had steadied her in the delivery room, how his hands had been sure, even when hers had trembled. She swallowed hard. "She's fine," she said, her voice clipped. "We're both fine." Nathan stepped closer, his gaze fixed on the baby sleeping against her. His expression softened, his breath hitching faintly, as if the sight of Lila unraveled something inside him. "She's beautiful," he whispered, and Eliza felt the words pierce deep. She wanted to push him away, to remind him that he had no claim here, not anymore. Yet, part of her could not ignore the flicker of recognition in his eyes, the unspoken echo of a connection that might not have been severed as cleanly as she had believed. Silence stretched, taut and heavy. Finally, Nathan said, "I'll leave you to rest." He turned toward the door, but his steps faltered, and for an instant she thought he might confess something, might reach back across the chasm that had divided them. Instead, he slipped into the corridor, his shadow swallowed by the hospital's dim light. Eliza lay back, her daughter warm against her chest, her heart thundering louder than any storm. She told herself she was imagining things, that exhaustion and memory were twisting reality into shapes it did not hold. But even as she closed her eyes, she could not banish the truth pressing at the edges of her thoughts. The man who had once been her everything was no longer just a ghost from her past. He had stepped back into her life when she was most vulnerable. And though she wanted to believe she could keep him outside the fragile circle she had built for herself and her daughter, she knew the storm was far from over. It had only just begun to whisper. The first rays of morning filtered through the slats of the blinds, turning the hospital room pale gold. Eliza Hart sat propped against pillows, her daughter curled against her chest. The storm outside had broken hours ago, but its echoes still lingered in her bones, the crack of thunder replaced by the fragile sound of Lila's steady breathing. Every rise and fall of her tiny chest felt like a miracle Eliza could barely comprehend. Yet with the dawn came questions she could not push aside. She had planned for this moment, imagined it countless times, and had always seen herself alone, her child in her arms, no one else in the picture. She had chosen it that way, determined to protect both herself and the baby from the complications of failed love and old wounds. But life had rewritten the script with cruel precision. Nathan Cole had walked into the delivery room, not as her ex-husband, not as the man she had once loved and lost, but as the doctor who caught their daughter as she entered the world. Eliza brushed a fingertip along Lila's cheek, whispering words more for herself than for the sleeping child. "You are mine. Whatever storms come, you are mine." But the truth she had buried deep pressed harder now. That one night in Savannah, that one mistake or mercy, depending on how she framed it, loomed larger with every heartbeat. She could not forget how Nathan looked at Lila, as though some of him already knew. The door creaked open, and Nurse Meredith slipped inside with her clipboard and gentle smile. "How are we this morning?" she asked softly, checking the monitors, her movements careful so as not to disturb the baby. "We're fine," Eliza said, though her voice sounded hollow in her own ears. Meredith studied her momentarily, her sharp eyes too kind to be fooled. "You're strong, Eliza. You've carried so much. But remember, strength doesn't mean carrying it all alone." She squeezed Eliza's shoulder before turning back to her chart. "Dr. Cole stopped by earlier. He asked me to let you rest." Eliza stiffened. "He was here?" Meredith nodded. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in years. Sometimes, storms don't end just because the sky clears. She finished her notes and left quietly, leaving Eliza with more questions than answers. Hours passed in a haze of visitors, nurses, and the constant rhythm of newborn needs. When evening began to fall again, Eliza barely noticed the sky beyond the window was washed in dusky pink. Exhaustion pulled at her, but she fought it, unwilling to surrender to rest while her thoughts tangled around the shadow of Nathan's presence. When the room finally stilled, a knock came at the door. Eliza's heart lurched. She knew before she answered who it would be. Nathan stepped inside, his posture careful, his eyes dark with something she could not read. He held a bouquet of white lilies, awkward in his large hands, and set them quietly on the counter before speaking. "I shouldn't disturb you," he said, his voice low, roughened by fatigue. I needed to see you both again." Eliza tightened her hold on Lila, her body tensing. "You've seen enough, Nathan. You did your job. Thank you for that. But this isn't your place anymore." He flinched, the words striking sharper than she had intended. But he didn't move. Instead, he stepped closer, his gaze fixed on the child in her arms. "She's perfect," he said softly. "You're perfect with her." Eliza's chest constricted. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't look at us like that. You gave up that right years ago." Nathan's jaw tightened. "I know what I lost, Eliza. I know what I threw away. But last night, holding her for the first time." His voice broke, and he swallowed hard. "I can't pretend it didn't mean something." Anger flared, sharp and hot, but beneath it pulsed something she didn't want to name. "You don't get to walk back into our lives because fate threw you into that room. You don't get to decide you want this now." He took another step, his eyes searching hers with a desperation she hadn't seen in years. "Maybe I don't deserve a place here, but I can't stand on the sidelines knowing she exists. Knowing that she might." He trailed off, the unspoken words thick in the air. Might be his. Eliza felt the floor tilt beneath her, the truth she had tried to bury pressed up against her ribs, suffocating. She remembered that night in Savannah, the way grief had broken through their walls, the way his arms had felt like both a wound and a home. She had told herself it was nothing, a mistake erased by time, but staring at him now, and then at her daughter, she could not escape the question clawing at her heart. Lila stirred, her small mouth opening in a soft cry. Eliza soothed her instinctively, but her hands trembled. Nathan watched, his expression carved with awe and pain. "Let me hold her," he said quietly. Eliza shook her head, clutching Lila tighter. "No, not now." His face fell, but he nodded, accepting the rejection with the same quiet dignity that once broke her heart. "All right, but I'm not going to disappear this time." The words struck deep. She wanted to scream at him to leave, to vanish back into the shadows where she had forced him to live in her memory. But a part of her, small and traitorous, wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that this time he would stay. When he finally left, the room felt colder, emptier, though his presence lingered like a storm cloud just beyond the horizon. Eliza pressed her lips to her daughter's forehead, whispering into the fragile dawn of their new life. "It's just us, Lila. It has to be just us." But even as she spoke the words, she knew the truth was more complicated. Fate had written Nathan back into their story, and no matter how fiercely she wanted to resist, the storm he carried would not be so easily shut out. The fragile dawn had broken, and with it came the first light of a truth she could no longer outrun. Night had fallen again, but the hospital corridor outside Eliza's room still buzzed with muted voices and the hum of machinery. Inside, though, the world seemed suspended. Eliza sat in the dim light, Lila swaddled against her chest, her gaze fixed on the shadowy window where raindrops clung like scattered pearls. The storm had ended, yet her heart carried its thunder. Nathan's words replayed endlessly in her mind. "I'm not going to disappear this time." He had said it with a steadiness that unsettled her more than any plea would have. She had built her life on the certainty that he was gone, on the belief that she could move forward without him. But now, his presence lingered like an echo she could not silence. Lila stirred, letting out a soft whimper, and Eliza rocked her gently. The baby's warmth grounded her, tethered her to the moment. Yet even as she whispered soothingly, her mind betrayed her, replaying the night in Savannah that she had tried to bury. The wine, the grief, the hollow laughter that had dissolved into desperate touches. One mistake. Or was it destiny clawing back what she had tried to deny? A knock broke the silence. This time it was not Nathan but Meredith holding a tray with tea. "I thought you might need something warm," the nurse said, her eyes soft with the kind of understanding that came from years of watching lives unravel and mend inside hospital walls. Eliza accepted the cup, grateful for something to hold. "Thank you." Meredith hesitated before speaking again. "Dr. Cole cares. I see it in how he looks at her, and you. I know it's not my place, but some storms return because they were never finished." Eliza swallowed hard, unable to answer. After Meredith left, the silence pressed heavier than before. She sipped the tea mechanically, her thoughts circling like vultures. The next morning, discharge papers arrived. Eliza packed slowly, folding the little yellow onesie into the bag, her heart aching at the thought of stepping out into the world with all its questions. As she settled Lila into the car seat, the door opened again. Nathan stood there, still in scrubs, exhaustion shadowing his face. "I wanted to walk you out," he said. Eliza bristled. "I can manage." "I know you can," he replied gently. "But let me anyway." The hallway stretched before them, sterile and endless. Eliza carried the bag, Nathan pushed the stroller, and silence filled the space between them. Outside, the air smelled of wet pavement and fresh beginnings. Eliza loaded Lila into her car, her hands trembling. Nathan lingered by the curb, his presence both comfort and torment. "She deserves to know the truth," he said suddenly, quiet but firm. Eliza froze. "What truth?" "That she might be mine." Her breath caught, the words striking like lightning. She had lived months believing she could silence that possibility, but spoken aloud, it felt undeniable. "You don't know that." "No," Nathan admitted, his gaze locked on hers. "But I can't stop seeing myself in her. And you can't tell me you don't see it too." Eliza's chest tightened. She wanted to scream, to tell him he was wrong, that David was the father, that the past had no power here. But the truth pressed at the edges of her resolve. She had called Nathan that night. She had let him back into her arms. And now she wondered every time she looked at Lila's dark eyes. "I can't do this," she whispered, opening the driver's door. "Not now." Nathan's hand pressed briefly against the car's roof, his knuckles white. "Then when? How long before you admit what's tearing you apart?" She slid into the seat, her hands gripping the wheel. "Goodbye, Nathan." He stepped back, his face unreadable, but his eyes burned with a fire she remembered too well. "This isn't goodbye, Eliza. You know it as much as I do." As she drove away, the silence inside the car felt like it would break her. Lila fussed softly, and Eliza reached back to soothe her, tears streaking her cheeks. She had promised herself she would protect her daughter from the chaos of her past. But the storm had returned, shattering the silence she had so carefully built. At home, Eliza lay Lila in her crib and sat on the edge of the bed, her body trembling with exhaustion and fear. She picked up her phone, staring at the screen, debating a call she never wanted to make. Finally, with shaking fingers, she dialed the hospital genetics department. "This is Eliza Hart," she said when the receptionist answered. "I need to schedule an appointment for testing." Her voice broke on the last word, but the decision was made. The silence was shattered, and the truth was coming for them all, whatever it might be. The clinic smelled of antiseptic and cold metal, where answers lived hidden in vials and charts, waiting to soothe or destroy. Eliza sat in the waiting room, Lila sleeping in her carrier at her feet, her heart hammering with every second. She had always believed herself strong enough to face anything, but this felt different. This was not about her. It was about the life she had brought into the world. A life that might be tied to a man she could not escape, no matter how far she ran. Nathan arrived on time, as if punctuality could disguise the storm in his chest. His dark eyes sought hers immediately, but Eliza looked away, focusing instead on the slow rhythm of her daughter's breathing. They sat in silence, the air between them dense with unspoken words. Dr. Chen appeared with a clipboard and a smile that was too professional to reveal anything. "Thank you both for coming. The tests will be simple. Just swabs and a small blood draw for each of you. Results will take about 72 hours. Eliza nodded, her throat tight. Nathan murmured his agreement, but his gaze never left Lila, who stirred and let out a soft cry. Without thinking, Nathan crouched down, his large hands moving gently as he adjusted her blanket. Lila quieted instantly, her dark eyes opening to meet his. The moment stretched, fragile and undeniable. The tests were over quickly, but the waiting stretched endlessly. Back at her apartment, Eliza moved through her days like a ghost, every cry, every smile of her daughter reminding her of the truth hovering just beyond reach. At night, when the world was quiet, she replayed every moment with Nathan, the laughter they once shared, the silence that had destroyed them, the single night when grief had broken their defenses. 3 days later, the phone call came. Dr. Chen's voice was steady, clinical, but the words landed like thunder. The results are conclusive. Nathan Cole is the biological father of your daughter. Eliza sat frozen, the world collapsing inward. She could hear Lila babbling in her crib, the innocent sound cutting sharper than any blade. Her chest heaved with sobs she could not release. This truth was not just about DNA, it was about destiny rewriting her story against her will. Minutes later, her phone buzzed with a message from Nathan. "Can we meet?" An hour later, he stood at her door, disheveled, his usual composure cracked. "I know," he said before she could speak. Dr. Chen called me too. His eyes softened as they drifted to the baby in her arms. "She's mine. She's mine," Eliza snapped, her voice sharp with fear and desperation. "I carried her, I raised her, I stayed when you left." Nathan stepped closer, his voice breaking. "And I will never leave again, not her, not you, if you let me." The words tore through her, leaving her trembling between fury and longing. She wanted to slam the door, to shield herself and her daughter from the chaos he brought. But when Lila reached out a tiny hand toward Nathan, gurgling with innocent trust, Eliza's resolve faltered. The silence between them was shattered, replaced by something far more dangerous, the fragile beginning of a new truth that could either eradicate them or give them the second chance neither dared to dream of. The air in Eliza's apartment was heavy, and the silence was so thick that it pressed against the walls. Nathan sat across from her at the small kitchen table, his hands clasped together, knuckles pale from the force of his grip. Between them lay a gulf filled with years of grief, regret, and a truth neither could deny anymore. Lila slept in her bassinet, her tiny breaths steady, oblivious to the storm brewing beyond her dreams. Eliza's voice finally broke the quiet. "You wanted the truth. Now you have it. But knowing doesn't change everything, Nathan. It doesn't erase the years. It doesn't erase the way you left me to grieve alone." His head lifted, eyes blazing with pain. "I didn't leave because I didn't care. I left because I couldn't breathe. Every time I looked at you, I saw what we lost. I thought if I buried myself in work, in saving other children, I could fix something, even if it wasn't ours. I was wrong, I know that now." Her laugh was sharp, bitter. "You think saying that now makes a difference? While I carried her alone, while I planned for every contraction, every sleepless night, every decision, you were gone." Nathan pushed back from the table, pacing the narrow kitchen, his voice taut. "And yet fate put me in that delivery room. Do you think that was a chance? Do you think I can just walk away, knowing she's mine? She deserves more than that. You deserve more than that." Eliza's arms crossed defensively, but her voice wavered. "What if I can't forgive you? What if I don't want you in our lives? Then I'll fight," Nathan said, stopping before her, his gaze unwavering. "Not against you, but for her. For a place in her life. I will not disappear again." The conviction in his tone rattled her. She wanted to believe it and let hope seep into the cracks of her heart. But fear kept her bound, fear of reopening wounds and building something fragile, only to watch it shatter again. The following days blurred into an uneasy rhythm. Initially, Nathan tentatively visited and brought small gifts for Lila, a soft elephant toy and a tiny knit blanket. He held her with a tenderness that both warmed and tore at Eliza. Lila seemed drawn to him, her cries quieting in his arms, her eyes tracking his movements with uncanny recognition. One evening, as the three of them sat together on the couch, Lila nestled between them, and Eliza found herself speaking truths she had locked away. "When we lost our son, I thought my heart had died. But holding her, it's like something has been reborn. And that terrifies me, Nathan, because if I let you in again, if I let myself believe, and you break me again, there won't be anything left of me to rebuild." Nathan's voice was raw. "Then I won't break you. I can't promise I won't make mistakes, but I can promise I'll stay. Not because I owe you, not because of guilt, but because I still love you. I never stopped." Tears stung her eyes, and she looked down at their daughter, who gurgled softly in her sleep. Lila's tiny hand had curled around both of their fingers, binding them in a grip stronger than either had imagined possible. Tomorrow loomed like an uncertain horizon filled with choices that could remake or ruin them. But for the first time in years, Eliza felt the weight of tomorrow not as a burden, but as something fragile she might dare to carry, not alone, but together. The following days carried a fragile rhythm that felt precarious and strangely hopeful. Nathan's presence had become steady, no longer hovering on the outskirts of Eliza's life, but woven into the small rituals of her daughter's world. He arrived with quiet consistency, Sunday afternoons spent in the apartment, evenings where he held Lila so Eliza could shower without rushing, late-night calls when Eliza's fear of motherhood overwhelmed her. Yet trust did not come as easily as routine. Eliza found herself watching him closely, waiting for cracks in his resolve. She remembered too vividly the nights when grief had swallowed him whole, when he had turned to the sterile lights of the hospital instead of to her. Now he stood in her kitchen making bottles, his shoulders broad, his touch careful, his voice low as he hummed to their daughter. It was everything she had once dreamed of, yet it terrified her more than solitude ever had. One evening, as the city outside softened into twilight, Nathan placed Lila in her crib and lingered by the window. Eliza joined him, her arms crossed as if to shield herself. "She looks at you like you're her whole world," Nathan said softly. "And maybe that's true, but she deserves both of us, Eliza. She deserves more than half of a family." Eliza's chest tightened. "And what if giving her both means losing myself again? What if trusting you costs me everything a second time?" Nathan turned to her, his expression raw. "Then I'll spend every day proving that it won't. Not with words, with actions, with showing up, staying, and being here when it's hard and not just when it's easy." His vow lingered in the dim light, settling heavy in her heart. She wanted to believe him, wanted to let hope grow roots, but the edge of trust was sharp, and stepping forward meant risking the fall. That night, long after Nathan had gone, Eliza sat by the crib, watching Lila's chest rise and fall. The weight of tomorrow pressed against her, but so did the memory of Nathan's eyes when he held their daughter. For the first time in years, she considered the possibility that trust, though fragile, though dangerous, might still be possible if they were brave enough to try. Autumn crept into the city with a chill that slipped through every crack in Eliza's apartment. Leaves rattled across the sidewalks outside, the world shifting toward endings and beginnings simultaneously. Inside, the air felt taut, stretched thin by everything unsaid. Nathan had been present every day for weeks, showing up with formula, diapers, or his steady hands ready to soothe Lila when exhaustion swallowed Eliza whole. He was careful and deliberate, never pushing too hard or overstepping. And yet, the very steadiness of his presence was its own storm, because it forced Eliza to confront the truth she had fought to bury. Part of her wanted to let him stay. One night, after another long day of juggling feedings and work calls, Eliza was crumpled on the couch, her head in her hands. Lila had been inconsolable for hours, and though Nathan had finally calmed her, Eliza felt the cracks in her armor widening. "You don't have to do it all alone anymore," Nathan said gently, setting a glass of water before her. She looked up, her eyes red. "Don't you see? That's exactly the problem. I've built my whole life around being alone, around not needing anyone. And now you're here, and she's yours, and suddenly everything I thought I could control is gone." Nathan sank onto the couch beside her, his voice low but urgent. "Control was never the point, Eliza. Love isn't about control, it's about trust. And I know I broke that once, but I'm begging you, let me earn it back." She stared at him, her heart aching with the weight of memory. "And what if you fail? What if you leave again? Then I'll spend the rest of my life proving I won't," he said. "Because I can't lose her, and I can't lose you again, either." The words hit her like a blow, breaking something loose inside. Tears spilled over, and before she could stop herself, she whispered, "I'm so tired of being strong." Nathan reached for her hand, but she didn't pull away this time. His fingers laced with hers, warm and steady, anchoring her in a way she hadn't allowed in years. For the first time since the storm-swept night when Lila was born, Eliza let herself lean, not on solitude, resolve, but on him. The breaking point had come, and instead of shattering, she found herself bending toward the possibility of healing. Winter settled over Atlanta with sharp winds and brittle skies, each gust rattling the windows of Eliza's apartment, as though the season itself demanded answers. The fragile truce she and Nathan had built around Lila began shifting into something larger, heavier, and far more dangerous. The lines they had drawn between co-parenting and intimacy blurred with every passing day, every late-night bottle they shared, and every stolen glance when laughter lingered too long. Eliza felt the change most acutely in the quiet hours. When Nathan read softly to Lila, his voice was a deep cadence that seemed to soothe the child and the aching corners of her heart. She remembered the man she had once married, the man who had once held her in storms, both literal and unseen. She hated herself for how easily those memories surfaced, and how badly she wanted to believe in them again. But memory was a treacherous thing. One evening, as snowflakes began to fall against the streetlights, Nathan arrived with a box tucked under his arm. He set it gently on the kitchen counter and looked at her with a mixture of nerves and hope. "I found this in storage," he said quietly. "It's ours." From before Eliza hesitated, every muscle in her body taut. When she finally opened the box, the past spilled out. Photographs of their wedding day, love letters written in a younger hand, ultrasound images of the child they had lost. The sight of it all cleaved her open, every wound raw again. "You kept all this," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I couldn't throw it away," Nathan admitted. "Even when I tried to bury the pain, I couldn't let go of you. Of us." Her tears fell freely, splattering across the faded ink of their old letters. "Why show me this now? Why force me to relive what destroyed us?" "Because we can't move forward pretending the past didn't exist," he said, his voice thick. "We have to face it, Eliza. All of it, even the parts that nearly killed us." The silence that followed was unbearable. Eliza wanted to run, close the box, and shove it back into the darkness where it belonged. But Nathan's eyes held her, steady and pleading. "Do you still love me?" he asked finally, breaking the last of her defenses. Her breath caught, her body trembling under the weight of the truth she had tried to deny. "I never stopped," she confessed, the words escaping like a confession carved out of her soul. "But love wasn't enough then. And I don't know if it's enough now." Nathan reached for her hand, his touch warm and firm. "Then let's make it enough. For her, for us." Lila stirred in her crib, her tiny cry slicing through the tension, reminding them of what truly bound them together. Eliza gathered her daughter into her arms, pressing her lips to her forehead. Nathan stood beside her, his hand resting gently on Lila's back, and for the first time in years, they stood not as strangers torn by grief, but as something closer to a family. The reckoning had come, and though the past still loomed, unforgiving and sharp, the present held the faint outline of a future, fragile, uncertain, but possible. Spring returned to Atlanta with tender blossoms along the sidewalks and a warmth almost like forgiveness. The city seemed to exhale, the heaviness of winter giving way to softer skies. Inside Eliza's apartment, life unfolded with the steady rhythm of small miracles. Lila's laughter filling the rooms, the smell of morning coffee lingering, the creak of the rocking chair where Eliza had spent countless nights. However, the most significant change was not in the outside seasons or Lila's growth. It was in the presence of Nathan, no longer a visitor hovering on the threshold of their lives, but a part of the home itself. Eliza had not given her heart back easily. She had tested his resolve with every doubt, every unspoken fear, and he had met each one with quiet persistence. He had shown up not with grand declarations but with constancy, holding Lila through fevers, cooking meals when Eliza was too tired to stand, laughing in the kitchen with flour on his hands and joy in his eyes. As the sun dipped low and painted gold walls one evening, Eliza watched Nathan play with Lila on the rug. Their daughter squealed with delight as he lifted her high, her little arms reaching toward the ceiling as if she could touch the sky. In that moment, Eliza saw not the man who had once broken her, but the man who had chosen to rebuild alongside her. Her voice was soft, almost lost in the hum of the city outside. "Do you ever think about what might have been if we hadn't lost him?" Nathan's arms stilled and he looked at her, his expression heavy with memory. Every day, but I also think about what we have now, about her, about you. And I know that somehow, through everything, we found our way back. Tears shimmered in her eyes, not of grief this time, but of something gentler. Hope. Healing. Love is reborn, not in the absence of pain, but through it. She crossed the room and knelt beside them, her hand resting over Nathan's as he held their daughter. "I don't want to fight anymore," she whispered. "I don't want to live in the shadow of what we lost. I want to live in what we've found." Nathan's eyes softened, his voice thick. "Then let's make this our home again. Not perfect, not easy, but ours." The three of them remained on the rug as twilight deepened, their laughter mingling with the night sounds of the city. Eliza felt strong, surviving, and whole for the first time in years. Home, she realized, wasn't a place. It was a choice. The arms held you through storms. The laughter broke through silence. The tiny hand curled around your finger, reminding you that tomorrow was worth the fight. And together, with their daughter between them, with hearts scarred but mended, they chose home.